System with him?
Yeah, I'm just talking to him directly with the computer. So
It's good to hear him start with his opening words yesterday.
yeah. But it was because of communication. I was letting them know, like, hey, you can go, but we got it now. We're good. All right, you guys. I'm gonna start with the intro right now. All right. Right. Intro's up. Your mic is hot when you're ready.
I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. What an amazing show Tavis Smiley just had on KBLA Talk 1580. Wow. The entire Democratic Party was dealt a major blow in New York yesterday. It's not something we're going to get to ignore because the primary season is just beginning in the Democratic Party. It seems that voters at the grassroots level have grown weary of traditional leadership. Many Democrats are now looking at and handicapping what took place last night. But it's not just about the policies. It's not just about the issues. It's not just about fighting Donald Trump. For some Democrats, it's becoming personal. They want the incumbents out. They no longer see them as big names, big legacies, big positions, and big titles. They see these men and women as not fighting for their legitimate interests in the streets. I don't know any other way to say it other than Mondami in New York walked the streets of New York. He challenged the Democratic establishment. He won the Democratic primary in an election that the mayor himself was not in. The mayor, Eric Adams, is running now as an independent outside of the Democratic Party, in part because of his legal problems and his relationship with Donald John Trump. But there will be a split in the general election. Some people will go with Eric Adams, some will go with Mamdani, and others, well, we'll have to wait and see. A Republican tries to squeeze between the great fissure within the Democratic Party. Today, my guest is Atiba Madian. He's the president and CEO of Party Politics US, a data collection firm that not only gathers data from American voters, but also engages with young people to educate them on public policy. With almost 25 years of experience, Atiba has built coalitions between corporations, nonprofits, government bodies, labor unions, advocacy groups, and the private sector with a specialty in knowledge and expertise in legislative strategy, communication, community organizing, outreach, and education. Atiba, welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show.
Jesse, it's great to be here. And wow, yesterday, your intro was great because yesterday it was surprising to some, but as I said before we came on to you, some people are not reading the tea leaves.
And that's exactly what I want to talk with you about. Your feet are on the ground. You have your head to the ground, your ears are to the ground, your eyes are to the ground. You see what's taking place in the Democratic Party. If I'm a traditional, in the 3 minutes that we have before we come to our break, if I'm a traditional Democratic politician, and I've been arguing all of the right polling questions, the right bells and issues, Medicare, Medicaid, Save Social Security. Yesterday wasn't just about policy. It was a rejection of Democrats within the party. Your thoughts, Atiba, on what those traditional Democrats are not hearing and are apparently both deaf and dumb.
You summed it up, but what you just said just brings me back to a conversation that I had back in 2000, I want to say 7, with the late Congressman John Lewis. And we sat in his office for 3 hours and he talked about what it takes to start a movement. And he said, keep your eyes on the prize. And right now, people didn't take initially overall in the Democratic Party to Bernie Sanders. But there's been a movement that he's got going that has been going on for a long time that people are not paying attention to within the Democratic Party. And the Democrats are spending way too much time with this idea of raising money. And I spend parts of my day writing stop into text messages, asking them to stop sending me texts, asking me for money for some candidates that I have no idea who they are. And that is almost as if the Democratic Party has become just about being a business and raising money and not about being grassroots and doing what Mom Donnie did and actually walking and shaking hands and talking to people and actually listening to what people's concerns are. And I think that was what his message was in New York. And that's why he won yesterday.
I can't disagree with you. I remember in the 9 successful campaigns for Congress that I had, what it meant to be standing at a metro station or a bus stop at 6 o'clock in the morning, people catching the early bus, shaking their hands, restaurants, visiting them where they were when they got off the bus, having cups of coffee for them. Not something easy to do. I mean, real retail politics and personal relationships. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. When we come forward, Atiba Madian is going to share with us his experiences on the ground and what could have taken place in New York over the last couple of months. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Listening to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show.
She gave me a lie. Came through the innocent time.
Junior, welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show, Messaging the Message with Atiba Median. Atiba, welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show.
Thank you, Jesse. It's good to be here.
Atiba, let me get right to the chase. This is our longest segment, about 17 minutes. What did the Democrats miss? What are the traditional party stakeholders missing in the message in New York that made a 32-year-old candidacy, a 33-year-old candidacy in the city of New York, the largest city in the nation, such a profound message to the Democratic Party yesterday?
Jesse, I think first thing is Democrats have to go back to their roots. You know, the roots are about the people. And, you know, you've got both sides championing this idea that a strong Wall Street is good for America. A strong Wall Street is only good for America if Main Street is also feeling prosperity. So you go back to 1992 to 2000, you know, there were people who were critical of President Clinton, but President Clinton's policies addressed the middle class. There were people who decided in November of 2024 that they wanted to go a different route than President Biden. But what was the messaging there? The messaging was, we're going to build the middle class out. Why is that such a bad thing? The Democrats can't keep saying that they're for something, but not doing something. And that's what they keep doing. They're not doing the things that, for instance, Lyndon Johnson did with addressing poverty. They're not doing the things that, for instance, Franklin Roosevelt did in addressing the working class, because they had to, they were forced to because of the Depression. So where Democrats are right now is, you know, people like to use the term you're a Republican and name only. Well, I think some of Democrats are Democrats and name only. They're not really getting back to the crux of what Bernie Sanders has been talking about, what AOC has been talking about, and what evidently Mamdani talked about in his campaign to win the election in New York. And until they do that, until they get back to grassroots organizing the way that we saw President Obama, some people just act as if President Obama just all of a sudden became president of the United States without taking into consideration the fact that he built a grassroots organization that helped to propel him to the presidency.
You know, I think in this moment about just how divided the nation is and how polarized it is, and I can certainly see this fight and this battle taking place in Blue America. That makes sense in blue counties. It certainly makes sense in blue cities. I can see it boiling up here in the city of Chicago. I can see it in Los Angeles. I can see it in Philadelphia. I can see it in Detroit. Now, obviously, we saw it last night in New York. It's going to happen in Atlanta. There's no doubt about that. But I don't see how the message of democratic socialism works in red America. I only see it serving to a greater divide, if you will. And certainly the messaging of the democratic socialist tends to, well, let's just say when Lyndon Johnson said, if you could convince the lowest white man to not, he could pick the pocket of another white guy, right? So it just seems to me that there has to be a messaging that cares for all people, from healthcare to housing to all of the economic issues that we know impact the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness of people, and the reality that we too are Americans, that we are not some Marxist Leninist, but that there is a way for us to participate in the great bounty that is America.
I'm hesitating because people keep talking about this idea of this label of socialism, and socialism is supposed to be counter of capitalism. But where has capitalism helped the poorest of poor? Where has capitalism not had its roots in slavery? So, you know, where Democrats, in terms of messaging, the message, what Democrats, I think, will do a better job of doing is not just labeling themselves. It's about identifying what is the root cause of why they lost the election in 2024. The root cause or reason why they lost wasn't because of Joe Biden. It was because they didn't have an economic message. It's because the Democrats keep taking up this whole thing as having this overall umbrella that's supposed to be, we're for this, we're for this, we're for this, we're for this, People are tired of hearing what you're for. They want to know what you're doing for me. What is putting more money in my pocket? The reality is, under Joe Biden, the economy was getting better. But the Democrats didn't message that. They ran away from the idea of talking about Joe Biden and his policies. Now we're in a situation where I don't know why it seems or feels as if the economy is going, people think that the economy is getting better, depending on who you talk to. But if you go into Wyoming, where the minimum wage is $5.15, you go into Georgia and ask somebody, or Atlanta, about the minimum wage being $5.15, you're going to have a disparity in terms of the demographics. We know that. That's America. We have 50 states of mind. We say 50 states. We have 50 states of mind. But the bottom line is, a person who's making $5.15 in Wyoming is hurting. A person in Georgia who's making $5.15 is hurting. So there is a unifying message that the Democrats can adopt without talking about socialism, without talking about capitalism. Just talk about economic means and how I can keep a roof over the heads of my family, how I can put my kids in college and help them to get in schools, how they can get a step forward, a step up, and how can I buy a home? How can I have a piece of this American pie that seems to be promised to all these other people? And that recognizing that the immigrants aren't the issue. The issue is right here in America with our whole idea of dividing ourselves, as opposed to recognizing we're stronger together. We're just as strong together, if we think about that from an economic standpoint, as we are when we're cheering on our athletes who go overseas or go somewhere else and compete in the Olympics.
When I think about democratic messaging, and when I think about progressive and winning messaging, for me, that means an American value, right? So when I see, for example, what's at stake in 2026, I see the Constitution on the ballot. I see democracy on the ballot. I see the role of the federal government with the states on the ballot. And I see the straight line through the Constitution, through the role of the federal government, to the least of these in the poorest counties in America, in Mississippi, in Alabama, south side of Chicago, in Los Angeles, in New York. I see a straight line that leads to a simple message. What do the people of New York want? That the people of Los Angeles want, that the people of Chicago want? And what is the economic foundation for it in the Constitution? And this is what I've arrived at. All citizens should enjoy the right to a public education of equal high quality, a constitutional amendment. It is an economic plan for all 90,000 schools. Rebuild them all. If every single one of them doesn't have an Olympic-sized swimming pool, if every one of them doesn't have a geometry teacher, if every one of them doesn't have Latin, French, English, and Spanish and multiple language instructors, including the basics of reading, writing, arithmetic. I'm not stopping there. All citizens shall enjoy the right to health care of equal high quality. That's an economic program, but it's a constitutional amendment. If we have to build 50 new Mayo clinics, 50 new Cleveland clinics, one in every state in this nation, with 5,000 beds to provide the American people the highest quality of care, that's an economic message that works, but I'm not a socialist. I mean, I don't want to run against a hammer and a sickle in a campaign where someone says, oh, he's the democratic socialist. Whether the hammer and the sickle have anything to do with it or not, it doesn't matter. In the last 2 weeks of a campaign, when someone puts up a sign who's on the other side of the candidacy and they make me un-American, Atiba, I can't win. Help me find the line between the economy, caring for the least of these, loving my neighbor, but at the same time, leave me firmly wrapped in the Bible and the Constitution. Get me there, Atiba.
Yeah, what I'm about to say, blame my mom. Because my mom puts so much of an emphasis on us about history, right? So I don't think you can tell any of this story. I've just finished watching Yellowstone in 1923 and 1883, and I was totally amazed because it was the first time I really saw like this depiction of white America and Native Americans in the context of the way that they did over the course of a series, not a movie, not a film, but in a series. America has a reckoning. All this stuff that's going on, the Democrats used to be the party for slavery. The Republicans were the party that was against slavery.
1854.
At some point, messaging switched that, right?
Yeah, 1930. I put that at 1935.
So
it seemed to have switched.
Yeah, and people seem to forget that Dr. King's father was a Republican.
That's right.
So we tend not to embrace history because it can be hard, but that's always been America. America has always become better because of the struggles that it's gone through. This is no different than that. What I'm not saying embrace the struggle. I'm saying embrace the reason why we keep going back to the same page in history. If we look right now at 100 years ago, what was going on in 1925? There was an impending depression coming on for 1929. There was a roaring 20s because people had just come out of a plague of the Spanish flu. There was a president who was recognized as being racist in Woodrow Wilson. There were all these things that were going on, and it's 100 years later, it's the same thing playing out again. So what was the lesson that we didn't learn then? I mentioned Congressman John Lewis before. What did he tell me about starting a movement? He said, Atiba, there would be times that we would go in and there was only one or two people sitting there in a meeting, but we kept having meetings and people started to come. Maybe it was 2 people today, but then there was 4 people. Then there were 6 people. Where our attention span is so short that we don't like. And when I have people who approach me about helping them with a campaign, my number one thing to them is, if you can stay on message, I'm happy to help you. But the moment that a person doesn't get their message or see what they said, no matter how profound it was, printed, or the media talking about them, they stop. No, you just talked about 9 terms running for Congress. You going out and being out there at 6 o'clock in the morning. They call it a political campaign a race for a reason. You're racing. And right now we have to race. And I think we have to get out of the context too. And this is a hard conversation to have with some people, though I've been having it quietly and in private, is we got to get out of the context of just talking about a Black America, an Asian America, a Hispanic America. Because when we send athletes to the Olympics and they have the United States flag on it, they're not going as a Black American, they're going as an American. And having grown up and had an opportunity to live overseas as a child, because my father's job took us over there, people didn't identify each other as being Black. If you were white, and we were oftentimes the only African-American family where we came together because we were American, because we were the minority. And here, we just keep allowing ourselves, as Abraham Lincoln said, a house divided cannot stand. That's what is going on right now. So I think ultimately, when you're talking about messaging and what does the Democratic Party need to do, they need to have a message of hope and not a message of fear. Every time I'm getting these text messages, they're always fearful. It has to be, we've got to go back to, people look at President Obama like, oh, how do you get hope and change? But he did bring a message of hope. President Clinton did have a message of hope. In some ways, President Bush, when he talked about compassionate conservatism, it was a message of hope. The question now, and people may not like President Trump, but he did give a message of hope to some people in America. So we've got to figure out how you take those things and put it together and mix it all together in the ingredients and figure out how this melting pot becomes something that we're pulling forward, an amazing dish, served warm, served cold, but that's American, that that resonates with everyone, not just resonates with someone.
I that's brilliant. That's brilliant. It's brilliant that you arrive at hope, and that comes from a deep reservoir. It's not, for me, at least campaign wise, it wasn't just being up at 6 a.m. working bus stops. It was also preaching 6 sermons at church on a Sunday morning. I was hopping from one church to the next church because I found in the reservoir of people that their spirits were broken and that I needed to give them a reason to believe again, and to that they could believe in me in that process, but we could believe in each other together. I was sharing, and I'm going to go to break, but I want to make this point. James Baldwin wrote an article in the Harper's magazine, I think it was, Harper's Weekly, in 1962, called The Dangerous Road, in front of Martin Luther King Jr. And he says in this article, about halfway through the article, he was trying to figure out what it was that made Martin Luther King Jr. tick. And he said, like the best of scholars, he was an intellectual. He went to Boston University and he got his PhD. Like many preachers, he was articulate, and he could certainly do that, James Baldwin said. But then he went on to say, after he laid out several other categories that showed Dr. King in an amazing perspective, He says Dr. King was in a depression, a personal depression, and he was able to identify the depression that the people in his congregation were feeling. And he suffered and they suffered. And in their suffering together, they laughed at Mr. Charlie. They talked about Mr. Charlie. And they came out of that depression together. And he was able to articulate a hope for them. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. When we come forward, we're going to hang around hope for a minute with Atiba Madian on the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. My very special guest, Atiba Madian, is the president and CEO of the Madian Group, a firm based in Washington, D.C. that focuses primarily on party politics, data collection firm that not only gathers data from American voters, but also engages with young people to educate them on public policy. He's been a part of historic delegations throughout his career as a political analyst and public affairs consultant, including the first African-American delegation of the American-Israeli Public Affairs Committee to Israel in 2007. In 2014, he traveled with a delegation of Muslim business leaders led by former South African ambassador to the United States, Ibrahim Rasool, to South Africa to meet with South African business leaders and to coincide with the 20th anniversary of the first free elections that led to the election of President Nelson Mandela. Atiba, welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show.
Thank you, Jesse. It's good to be here.
Let's go to this place of hope where James Baldwin left us in his critique, analysis, profound understanding of Dr. King. Could it also be that Democrats, I think Bill Clinton said it this way, can't feel our pain, that they don't identify with our pain, and therefore they can't speak to our pain from that place that makes us believers, let's say like Jesse did, or like Barack Obama did, or like those leaders who compelled us beyond our suffering to action?
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. Jesse, a couple of things, even, every day I'm thinking about two things, hope and love.
Mm.
We often hear people talk about faith. I'm not quite sure you can have faith without also having an ounce of hope.
Mm.
And if you think about clergy wearing a black with the white here,
Mm-hmm.
right? From what I've come to understand and have embraced is that black represents faith, white represents hope. So we want to have those things together. So when you talk about President Clinton, where was President Clinton always talking about being from? Hope, Arkansas.
Mm.
I don't think that like, when my faith doesn't allow me to think that was by accident that he had this connection to Hope, Arkansas.
Mm.
My belief that President Obama becomes the president my hope is that it's not a mistake that his father was born in Africa and his mother was born in Kansas.
Mm.
So when you look at those ingredients, what have you, even with President Trump and making America great again, all these things are just part of the fabric of what God has given us and for us to like look at, to identify, and how do we bring about and get back to faith and hope. The problem with America is that we've lost our faith and then we don't have hope, because in order to be able to do a lot of the things that are going on right now, you can't have hope. Right now, everything is about fear. People are turning the television on. I'm picking up the phone every day, reading the news. What is it? The news is filled with nothing but fear.
Mm.
Where is the hope? And we can never manifest and get ourselves out of this without faith and hope. And so, when your father, I just remember, keep hope alive.
Mm.
But we heard it, but he kept saying it. And it was a great message. Up with hope, down with dope. These are all things that were planted in me. Mm-hmm. And so where'd your father come from? You talked about Dr. King and being depressed and all the who wouldn't be depressed going through all those things and trying to lead people, and I think about, for instance, an organization that people call the Black Nationalist Group that I came from. My parents were members of the Nation of Islam when I was born, and the nation provided hope to African Americans by saying, do for self. Mm. What did John F. Kennedy say in his 1961 inauguration speech? Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Mm. And I think that's where this whole messaging thing of hope has to come from within. We have to find out, what are we willing to do, give, sacrifice, and make way for a better place. And you have to hope. You have to have faith that by doing the work that things are going to get better, but you also have to do so with hope. That's where I think the messages of Clinton and Obama And I'm saying this about President Trump because President Trump has given hope to some people the same way that President Obama gave hope to some people. And I think that you have to like really pay attention to that and trying to figure out from your messaging standpoint, where is your message going to resound, and not just say that you're going to do something, because that's where Mamdani's issue is going to be right now in New York. He's giving a lot of people hope, but can he actually carry out the hope that he's promised?
I think that's right, and I think that, again, brilliantly, I think you put that in terms of messaging the message, and that is, in my opinion, these candidates cannot be separate and apart from the representation that they claim they are going to provide for people in state legislative bodies or in the Congress of the United States, or if they are running for president. I can tell you right now, if you were born with a silver spoon in your mouth and you think you can just run for president and ignore people who are about to get kicked off of the Medicaid rolls, the only health care they have access to, or the only food on someone's table, or the only education through scholarships or through federal loan programs that they were ever going to get, if you're going to talk past the reality of their pain and not identify with it, I don't see a future for this political party. And towards that end, how do you shape someone? But you're not running for Congress, as far as I know. You're not running for the Senate, as far as I know. And I don't believe you pitched your hat in the ring for 2028. I wish you would. But how do you shape not phony candidate preparation, but find people in this space to step forward?
I had a hard time with this New York City race. I'm not going to say who, or have a good friend who ran in that race. And he called me a couple times and asked for dollars. And I don't want to say I ignored the call because I called back once, but I just kept looking at the polling and kept saying, you're not going to win. When I look at the Michigan Senate race, I had people who were asking me to give to a candidate there. And I was like, that person's not going to win. I think that people have to get outside of let go of their ambition and look at the reality. And the reality is that Democrats have to be figuring out, okay, if we have these candidates on the thing, regardless of a primary, who are polling at 1% and less, get out of the race. Let the better ideas come forward and help people who align best with what you think should be the platform, because then in turn, those people will come back and help you later on.
I think that's right.
People have to, as voters, also demand a better menu. If you're not if you're not sitting at the table, you must be on the menu. So a lot of us are on the menu right now. So whether or not it's Medicaid cuts or Medicare, and the question I think that really that Americans should be looking at, Democrats have failed on, is that, and I've been saying this for 30 years, Democrats keep coming to our churches and asking for a vote on Sunday, but then or a vote on Tuesday. And then when they get into office, they don't pay up. President Trump has shown that, people said, well, we can't get voter reform. We can't get police reform because we don't have this. But the Democrats have had the presidency, the Senate, and the House. What does the president have right now? The presidency, the Senate, and the House. And what are they doing? They're ramming down things. That the Democrats didn't do that. And people have been saying, well, they could, but they didn't do it. So in 2010, they were happy because they got uniform health care through. And since then, what have they done? I mean, I'm always told, what have you done for me lately? And so Democrats, right? Yes.
I'm Jesse Jackson Jr., listening to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. When we come forward, more of Atiba Madian on the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. This is the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show on Wealthy Wednesdays. In our next hour, S. Todd Yeary, doctor, PhD, practicing lawyer, practicing preacher and minister, will be with us in the next hour on Wealthy Wednesdays with Reverend Dr. Todd Yeary. We've got a lot to cover with Dr. Todd Yeary. In this hour, our very special guest has been Atiba Madian. We've been discussing New York. We've also been discussing that election last night. We've been discussing the character that it takes to connect with people and to identify with people and then to represent people at every level of government so that you're authentic. I think that's the word that I'm looking for. Atiba, welcome back to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show.
Still good to be here.
And, I want to thank you for hanging around with us part of the next hour, just part of it, so that we can continue this in-depth dive into faith. And I want to, as I do at the end of every program, give my guests an opportunity for a word of hope. And we still have plenty of time for that. But I did want to say this, because during the break, I thought about my dad. And he was born in Greenville, South Carolina, to an unwed mother. She was 16 years old. He was called bastard. He was called illegitimate. She got kicked out of the choir at 16 years old because she was pregnant with him. She was told that her baby would never amount to anything. And that's the segregated Greenville, South Carolina that my dad grew up in. Somewhere along that journey, some people influenced my dad. He came up with this idea, I am somebody. And when he spoke to people, he spoke to them from the depth of his experience of nobodiness. And when we think about Dr. King being middle class, you've never not seen Dr. King well-dressed. And I mean well-dressed in the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s. A hat, a suit, a tie, the way he carried himself, Boston University. But he had to shed himself in Birmingham, in Montgomery, on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, to be with garbage workers in Memphis, Tennessee, to be who he became as a leader and to have followers of people. When I talk about identifying with people and their suffering and their pain, my sense is we've got plenty of policy wonks in Washington, in whatever party affiliation, but we've not been able to produce, Atiba, leaders quite like that yet. Your thoughts on reaching into that reservoir? Provide us with some hope in this final segment of our show.
Yeah, I think part of this is, and I was talking to my mom earlier, and I mentioned the Nation of Islam earlier, because in DC next week, there's going to be a play about Elijah Muhammad's wife, Clara. And I'm saying that because within the Nation of Islam, they have what they call MGT, Muslim Girls Training. And what they were doing was preparing the women, recognizing the women are the foundation of our communities. But, I'm here in Miami, Florida, and I can't tell you how many times I see women outside with rollers in their hair and with slippers and pajamas, things that I would never have ever seen. In fact, like my grandparents would have said, what are you doing before you go outside like that? We've seen for decades young men and men in general walking with their pants down. You talked about Dr. King being depressed. This country is depressed. This country has a reckoning, as I've mentioned, because it has taken so much. And so when you talked about Medicare, and we were talking about the Democrats, here's the message that I think the Democrats should go to or should talk about, or what our next leaders, regardless of political party, should talk to, should promise and actually carry out. And that is, how are we figuring out how to increase our minimum wage to a livable wage? And a livable wage means $30, $35 an hour at least, regardless of what state you live in. Stop perpetuating this idea that we can't do it because businesses will flounder. Stop taxing businesses so much so they can pay employees. And put a tax on companies that then take away, have so much profit that it ends up hurting the workers, because you keep firing workers to help your bottom line. Because the bottom line is, a prosperous America with prosperous Americans will create prosperous companies and help elevate all of us. It's just simple math.
Mm.
And the thing is that we keep looking at this idea, and Democrats have done a job of protecting folks or whatever, and at the same time making promises but never carrying out the promise. So, you know, the Republicans, the Democrats, we want to protect the Republic. The Republic has to feed the interests of the people. Stop and give us vacation time. Stop and give us time to be able to be with our children. Stop and give us time to be able to think so that we can rationalize and invest and hire and fire bad politicians. Because the bottom line is the way that things are going in this country right now, the way the direction is, we keep asking why we don't have better elected officials. We don't have it because we keep accepting throughout our lives, where I just talked about in terms of how we dress, how we carry ourselves, we keep accepting mediocrity when we used to accept excellence. And we've got to get back to a point where we're building up and want to create the most excellent citizens for the world.
Brilliant, Atiba. Listen, we got about a minute and a half left in this particular hour. I know you're going to hang with us. Tell us about your novel, Saving Grace.
Well, I got an opportunity to work on environmental issues. My first job out of college, my father hit me up and said, well, you know, the well has run dry on this one. So I had to go out and get a job and work for EPA. And, you know, the thing working there was I came to understand that environmental issues are a civil rights issue. It's actually a human rights issue. So Saving Grace is actually about an attorney who's been kidnapped because he's working on a case and finds that there is some activity that's going on that's killing his clients. And as he continues to peel back and to figure out things that are attached to this kidnapping and attached to this case, he keeps recognizing that nothing is what it seems. The people that he's going up against, the politicians, the business, what have you. And that's basically the impetus in terms of what life is. And when we look at politics, people look at what the media gives us on the surface without recognizing that there are other meetings and other things that are going on behind the scenes that control the different facets of our life. And so I've done this, hopefully, and people who've read it say it's a page turner with the idea of having an entertainment or a storyline, and at the same time, hopefully educating people about the different things that are going on in our lives every day that we take for granted that are impacting us.
Atiba, I'm at the top of the hour. This is Jesse Jackson on the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. When we come forward, Atiba is going to tell you exactly where we can get this book, and we're going to continue our conversation with S. Todd Yuri. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. You're listening to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show in the second hour of Wealthy Wednesdays. Our regular contributor, S. Todd Yeary, is the principal of the Yeary Firm, a Maryland-based litigation and government relations firm, and also serves as the senior pastor of the Douglas Memorial Community Church of Baltimore and affiliates. Dr. Yeary is also former chief executive officer of the Rainbow Push Coalition, the international organization and civil rights organization founded by my father, the Reverend Jesse Jackson. Dr. Yeary, welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. I think I have to unmute you, Dr. Yeary. You're going to have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, there you go. I've been at it all day. So, but it's always good to hang out with you and see what kind of interesting shenanigans you're going to be up to. So let's talk today.
Dr. Yeary, I want to introduce to you Atiba Madian, who was our first hour guest. Atiba runs a data collection firm in Washington, D.C. In the first hour, we were analyzing what was taking place on the ground in New York and the shifting landscape in the Democratic Party in blue states, blue cities, blue counties across the country. Yes, some of it in reaction to Donald Trump, to the MAGA movement, but clearly within the Democratic Party, some kind of civil war is taking place against the traditional incumbent names, power brokers, and Cuomo did not win last night. Mamdani did. And there are enormous consequences for that. We had, I thought, a very brilliant conversation, essentially directed by Atiba in the first hour, and it concluded, I'd like to think, on the authentic place from where hope comes that Mamdani represented in New York, an alternative, a clear alternative to the do-nothing politics of just policy wonks and people who follow polls and push buttons, but that authentic relationship with religion, with faith, with public service, with giving back. And as Atiba said in the first hours, his mama raised him right, and the things his mother taught him mattered. First, I want to make this introduction. Atiba, this is Attorney Todd Yeary. Todd Yeary, this is Atiba.
It's great to meet you. Great to be here.
Good to be with you as well.
Dr. Yeary, I want to allow Atiba to finish sharing with us about his book, Saving Grace, and then we're going to continue this conversation from your perspective of what took place on the ground in New York. Atiba, we were talking about Saving Grace before the break.
Yes, sir. I'll just say, if the listeners would like to get a copy, you can go to my website is my first and last name, atibamajun.com. And I'll be happy to sign a copy and send it to you.
Fantastic. atibamajun.com. ATIBAMADYUN.com is where his book is available. He'd be happy to sign it. Please go to his website and find out more information about the book. Dr. Yeary, what happened last night?
I think you said it best. The ground shifted. I think you're seeing a turning away from establishment entitlement around the Democratic Party and an openness and a willingness to explore other voices, to take the lead in terms of framing out a policy agenda that is actually focused on the interest of people. Now, of course, I believe last night may have been ranked choice. So the static dynamic of one and done has often worked against the interest of folks who are trying to make sure that they can penetrate this entitlement wall of historical politics. When you start changing the formula, when I can have a first choice, and then if my first choice doesn't come away with a majority on the first ballot, I then have a second choice, right? When we start doing ranked choice, first choice, second choice, who do I want? It now allows for a prioritizing of whose voice I want to hear. And so I think that is a significant shift from what the politics that we have known has always been. You pick your choice, whether you're going to ride a donkey or an elephant, or if you're going to go independent, you're going to pick your color red, blue, or green. Now it says I don't have to be locked in other than the primary, if they're closed primaries, when it comes to determining who's going to move forward, whether it's closed or otherwise, it says I can then get somebody else possibly through who may not in a poll actually have the numbers to say that they could win 1-to-1. But when you invite more people to participate for more than one ballot, if you will, I think it really levels the field for us to get new and possibly exciting voices into the political discussion.
We have about 1 minute before the break. Let me allow Dr. Yuri just to answer this question, and then we'll come forward with a broader conversation. And again, Atiba, thank you for yielding us some more of your time. Is there a message in this 1 minute that resonated with you, Dr. Yuri, that came through loud and clear for the Democrats across the country?
I'm not sure thematically if there was a message except pay attention. You know, sometimes we make these things too complicated, but it sounds to me that if you could get someone who wasn't even polling, really registering in the early polls, who is able to position and build really kind of coalitions around the types of policies that he would want to advance, I think it says to the Democratic Party establishment that keeps holding on to the nostalgia of yesteryear, pay attention.
I'm Jesse Jackson Jr., listening to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. This is Wealthy Wednesdays on the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. S. Todd Yuri is our regular contributor, and our very special guest is Atiba Madian when we come forward. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. This is Wealthy Wednesdays on the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show with S. Todd Yeary, 1 foot in the pulpit and 1 foot in the courtroom. And our very special guest staying with us through the first hour is Atiba Madian. He is an author. He is a data collection expert. He studies corporations as well as voters. He's widely respected and widely sought after by government relations firms and everybody who wants to get elected to something. Atiba, welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Hey, let me just raise this because there's a lot of talk on the news programs all across the country about what New York represents. But Todd, you talked about the one-off, and that one-off is ranked voting. When I was in politics, we called it cumulative voting, where you vote for not just your first choice, you vote for a second choice, a third choice. In the final analysis, the third choice loses, but your second and third choice, if you were third choice voters, those votes are distributed upwards to the second and the first choices. And ultimately, every vote counts because no one's vote is wasted in that process. So Madian is the victor, Mandami, if you will, is the victor in that context. Now, the whole country is talking about how a trend is coming out of New York. Well, that trend is coming out of New York if you have ranked voting. That trend works in ranked voting. But if there is no ranked voting, the other 8 candidates in the New York race, had they only had a choice between Cuomo and Mandani might not be the Democratic nominee today because he would be the machine-backed candidate, the candidate of Jim Clyburn, the candidate of all the Democrats that came in, not the Bernie Sanders and the AOCs, but the big Dems. Most Democratic primaries in the country, to which we are drawing certain assumptions going into the primary season, don't have ranked voting. So these are still going to be machine races with labor, boots on the ground. It's not going to be 1, 2, 3, your best choice. It's going to be whoever can put that organization together, get out of the box, and win on election day. To that extent, those machine Democrats, Atiba, may not be the beneficiaries of the Mandami messaging that catapulted him to prominence and to victory in the New York race. Help me here, Atiba.
No, I agree with you 100%. You know, New York is just different, and it's New York.
All night long.
But in the last hour, I talked about movement and I talked about being in the office with Congressman Lewis and, you know, getting some of his wisdom. You know, number one thing is people got to vote. They have to vote. And if people think that their votes don't count, look at where we are today. You know, you may not like, you know, people, I hear people say all the time, well, nobody excites me. You still turn the television on if your team is not doing well. And but you know, but people keep wanting, because we've been conditioned to this idea that we have to have someone who speaks to all of our issues. No, you got to figure out who's going to, and where the Democrats I think need to be right now, who's going to make your quality of life better, and go and vote. And if you don't like who you have to choose for, then either go pick up a clipboard and put your name on the ballot and have a message, or find somebody who does. It's just the bottom line. That is what the democracy is about. And right now, when you have millions of people who are not voting, but then millions more who are complaining, then the problem is not the Democratic Party. It's not the Republican Party. It's the voter.
Todd, mainstream Democrats who don't have ranked voting systems, did they learn anything last night, or are they just going to carry the same old message and not appeal to young voters who showed up in great numbers in New York with their stale messaging and stale messengers?
So it depends. And since you have a good data person on, the thing that I would want to look at is how many overall voters participated. Do we get any demographic insights to let us know whether or not ranked choice voting gave us a broader tent of folks participating, or did we just see a new process for those who have historically gone out to participate in primaries, right? That's one. I think we got to get a little more information to tease that out. Once we look at that, whether it's if you can glean SES, age, education, a number of different factors that will inform, then I think that allows us to then maybe extrapolate some insights that might be applicable to the Democratic Party. Net, the outcome, I think, is a byproduct of what we think ranked choice voting could give. Whether or not ranked choice voting has changed the makeup of the participants, to Brother Atiba's point, if we still have a participation issue in some of the places where you've got historic, long-term Democratic Party hegemony, it may not change much. It may change the way you formulate who wins, but if you're not getting more people to participate in the process and you're not speaking to a broader electorate, you could just have a new version of an old problem.
Atiba, when we talked about earthquake, Cuomo's not the only person who lost last night. Bill and Hillary Clinton endorsed him. Jim Clyburn endorsed him. Democratic leadership within the Congress of the United States endorsed him. Members of Congress in New York, given the Eric Adams dynamic, endorsed him. They lost in that scenario. What's the message?
Young people. I mean, let's look at Mondami's age. He's 33. You know, I'm 53. If I go and talk to a young person, it's a different conversation.
They call you Unc? Do they call you Unc? That's what my son calls me. He's Unc.
OG.
You know, something real offensive.
Pops. Yeah, my son calls me Pops. I said, Pops. I call my dad Pops. I'm sorry.
But no, it's okay. The reality here is the younger people are being engaged because they're affected. You know, when I talked about the minimum wage, it's impossible, nearly impossible to live in New York now. So when Mamdani talks about rent controls, that resonates. But it resonates with young and old. When he talks about free bus rides, people need to get to work. That resonates. And it keeps going back to James Carville hit it on the nail back in 91, 92. It's the economy, stupid. It's never changed. And the Democrats do not have an economic message. When they're talking about Medicare and Medicaid, and this is what I want to try to make the point at last, is that the Democrats should be trying to figure out a message that helps people recognize that, hey, I'm trying to create something so you don't have to be on Medicaid. I'm trying to create something so you don't need welfare. Democrats seem to continue to portray or promote a message. Well, we're here. We want to take care of you. But that means let me give you a crutch. Don't let me give you the car because I still want you to be dependent on me. And that's what I've seen from Democrats for the last 30 years.
You know, one of my biggest concerns, and both of you can take a shot at it. I know we're going to lose Atiba in just a few minutes, but the big, beautiful bill, 10 trillion in tax cuts over 10 years, $800 billion in Medicaid cuts, some $700 billion in Medicare cuts. I may have the numbers slightly off, but I'm not that far off. It just seems like many of the dreams that this generation, that let's say Mamdani represents, and even those of us who are progressive represents, we're not going to be able to pay for our dreams. And therefore, budgets over the next 10 years, if in fact this big, beautiful bill becomes the law, is going to have us as idealistic dreamers without a plan for the capacity to pay for them. Take a shot at that, Dr. Yuri and Atiba. And then Atiba, I want to thank you for spending this time with us. Dr. Yuri?
It's a math problem. Listen, the federal government can do what state and local governments cannot, and that is operate at a deficit and print money, obviously, right? And so the mechanism by which you pay for public services, depending on who's footing the bill, looks different. And so when we talk about things like Medicare for seniors, Medicaid for folks who are around the poverty line or some factored thereon, but we're not talking about living wages. What does it take to be able to get somebody into employable positions that are consistent with 21st century marketplace? If we're not reframing the broader conversation about who pays for, taking care of the roads in my community or addressing the public spaces in my community, if we're not really having a broader civic conversation, I think we often miss this mark. And so this notion that you're going to be able to absorb increasing costs for services and goods and somehow be able to cut your revenue raising framework and not bring more participants who are making more money to be able to pay more of the taxes to make up the delta, then eventually you're going to create such pressure that you're not going to have any other choice but to look back at your revenue model. And so we're not having an honest conversation. We're not having a credible conversation about how government works and how government services get paid for. We just talk about some folks are going to get big tax cuts. Everybody else is going to get big tax burdens, and nobody's answering the fundamental question, which is, so what?
Mm.
And I remember when I was a kid, when I got my first check, Mayor Barry had created a summer youth employment program. And here I am, 14 years old, excited. Now I'm getting my check. And when I got that first check, there was federal deduction, there was state deduction, and then there was this thing that I had never heard of. Mom, what is this thing, FICA?
FICA. Who is FICA?
Right. And why are they taking the money from me? So, we keep hearing about tax cuts for the wealthy. And we heard President Biden talk about what tax cuts for the middle class. But the reality is, within this society, and we don't talk enough about this, is that you work to pay taxes. And then the federal government then runs a deficit. But if I run a deficit, I'm out on the street. State government runs a deficit, then they have to figure out how they're going to borrow or steal or whatever to get to have that balanced budget. And all along, the people are the ones who are put to blame because, we got to pay for your health care. We got to do this. Well, I'm working and I am the engine that makes the country run. So I think that, the part of the Democrats' conversation really should be, how are we helping to not only cut your taxes? Because the wealthy are feeling like, well, we're paying taxes and we see us having to have more police officers. We see that, we having to keep paying for more people to go to school because I can pay for my kid to go to a private school. There has to be a national conversation about how we all can get along in this process. And at the same time, not necessarily be so dependent and so many people be dependent on the government. How are we helping people so that they can stand on their own 2 feet and be able to take care of their families and be able to be the engine through the worker, and at the same time, vacation. I'm real big about this vacation thing. 2 weeks a year, if that. We've got to really think about how we're making this about the American worker, so that when people do retire, they can live comfortably, so that children can have food on their tables, and so that parents aren't having to work 1, 2, and 3 jobs to make ends meet.
Atiba, thank you for being on the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show.
Thank you for having me. It's great being here.
Where can we get Saving Grace once again?
My website is Atiba, ATIB as in boy, AMADYUN.com. And I'm happy to sign a copy and send you one. Atiba,
you're always welcome on the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. Thank you for your contribution today.
Thank you so much. Great to be with you. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
That's Todd Yeary. I am an idealistic person. I'm 60 years old. I still have this zest and this zeal that everyone deserves health care, education, a clean, safe, and sustainable environment, that fair taxes will one day be part of the structure of the Constitution. None of these things are there. But we're about to give $10 trillion away to Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, and people who don't need it. 1%, 2% of the population. How are we going to pay for these dreams? I heard a wonderful speech last night from Mandami, and I know that we only have, 1 minute before the break, before we come forward. So I know that you're going to have to answer this question on the other side, and obviously this is going to end in the next segment on a word of hope from S. Todd Yeary. But man, I just don't see how there's not a jackknife that's coming for progressive politics, which makes the case for all of the possibilities and all of the things that America says that it can be or that we desire for it to be. Somewhere in that Bible, it says, where your treasury is, your heart shall follow. I'm sorry. Where your heart is, your treasury shall. You know what I'm trying to say.
Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. They reside in the same place.
I need you to fix that for our listeners when we come back, because
Yeah.
our heart is in the right place, but they're about to give the money away to pay for our dreams. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. You're listening to Wealthy Wednesdays with S. Todd Yeary on the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. When we come forward, more with S. Todd Yeary. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. You are listening to Wealthy Wednesdays with attorney S. Todd Yeary, 1 foot in the pulpit, 1 foot in the courtroom. Dr. Yeary, welcome forward.
Good to be with you. Congratulations on 2 hours. You're doing big things. We got to have important conversations, and I'm glad to hang out with you.
I appreciate you so much. You're a significant part of those important conversations. Dr. Yeary, before the break, we were talking about our faith and our money, and that putting our money where what we believe is. It seems to me that this big, beautiful bill, which they don't call a tax cut, is obviously a massive shift of income and wealth upwards away from the American people. Every time the American people then demand an increase in the minimum wage or some kind of health benefit, they're going to accuse the poor and the least of these as being responsible for the deficit and the debt, when in fact the so-called big, beautiful bill is actually responsible for shifting the resources to fewer and fewer people who don't need what's coming their way. Dr. Yeary, help us reconcile that. I feel like, personally, not only are we morally bankrupt, but we're just about financially bankrupt as well.
Well, let's start with the latter point. Anywhere else I've been, when you have a negative balance sheet, you're broke. So I'm not sure what kind of funny math they've been doing, but to Brother Tibu's point earlier, we can't do that kind of math at our homes, right? We got to look at things differently. But I think at the core is the question about the morality. You know, we often talk about budgets as if they are just simply numbers. The numbers are symbols. The symbols relate to the moral priorities that are addressed in that budget, right? Where does the money go? Who does the money benefit? And for what purpose? And so because budgets, when we look at governmental budgets, public budgets, those are the obligations of government entities to allocate public dollars. And we have the federal public budget. Each state has its own public budget. Local governments have their public budgets too. So all up and down the spectrum, we have a challenge to verify whether or not the budgets that are passed in supposedly the interest of the people reflect the principles, the values that go along with that budget. And so when we look at these things, when you raise the issue of where your treasure is, there will your heart be also, right? It is a combining, a linking, a tethering of the reality of how money and interest go together. When we think about the notions of generosity and reciprocity, what goes around comes around. That doesn't benefit the masses of the people in the United States. That seems to only be relegated to the entitlement class, those folks who have been able to accumulate great wealth to the exclusion of others. And while you have a handful of those, relatively speaking, compared to the overall population that fall in that category, you have a whole bunch of people that they fight against when we talk about a $15 an hour minimum wage, as if somehow or other, because you're poor, you'll get more than 24 hours in a day. If we made $15 an hour and worked a 40-hour-a-week job, full time, right? That's what they want you to do. They want you to go to work. You would only gross $31,000 in the year with taxes and all of the other obligations to come from it. So that then means that if I had three full-time, $15 an hour jobs, I'm still not making $100,000 a year. And that then obligates me to spend 120 hours every week just to be able to make that happen if I'm making an hourly wage. And so we've got to have conversations about what are the pathways to opportunity? What is the value of work? We keep imposing this issue that somehow or other poor people who are not able to run out and take, $5, $6, $7, $8, $9, $10 jobs because the federal minimum wage is still $7.25 an hour. that somehow or other it's their problem, it's their fault, and therefore they are leeching off of the rest of us because we have to make it possible for them to have health care, for them to be able to make sure their kids can eat when they go to school and not lose sight of the fact that they can't concentrate because they're hungry. Somehow or other, we've changed this paradigm to place the burden of those who are already burdened. And it's not because somehow or other they're shiftless, they're not diligent, they're not hardworking. They just don't have the framework nor the institutional or governmental support to say the value of my participation in the marketplace has a baseline value that affirms the dignity of who I am.
I just want to share with our listeners and our viewers just how uniquely this labor conversation is when it comes to African Americans. My dad says it this way. In slavery, everybody had a job. In slavery, everybody had a job, but it wasn't for 8 hours. There was no vacation time. There was no standard work week. You worked straight through the weekends. The job was round the clock from the plantation to the master's house. Round the clock. There were no health care benefits. There were no retirement benefits. Without slavery, the Emancipation Proclamation, the Juneteenth commemoration, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution, slavery became a new form where at the end of a hard day's work, you still could not feed your family. It's the same system by a different name. It's not chattel slavery with chains and whips and a foreman. It's labor slavery. It's working without benefits. It's paying taxes on tips. It's challenging state governments to keep up with the federal minimum wage and not have a minimum wage beneath the federal standard, and then fighting the federal government to raise the minimum floor beneath which no American can fall, $35 an hour, so that you can work your way out of a ghetto, out of a barrio, and out of a trailer park, have benefits, have a quality of life, and yes, as Atiba said in the previous hour, a couple of weeks off for vacationing with your family. My Uncle Foster in Greenville, South Carolina, he must have died, I'm 60 years old, he must have died 50 years ago. Spending time in the South, in Greenville, South Carolina, Uncle Foster would come from Easley to Greenville to visit us. He had the same pair of overalls most of his life. He worked at the mill for 70 years. For every year, he never missed a day at work. And you go to his little shotgun home, he prided himself in these little black frames that he had all across his house. From the first day he started work, he never missed a day of work. Every year, he became known as the worker who had the perfect attendance at the mill. They'd give him a little frame certificate. And the only year that he did not have a frame certificate, he decided to come to my grandfather's funeral. Mr. Charlie wouldn't give him the day off. And the one day he missed at work, living in his shotgun house with chewing tobacco smell all over the front porch, was the day he had to make Grandpa Charlie Henry's funeral. That's the world we live in. Many years after the 13th Amendment to the Constitution. So our brown brothers and sisters coming across this border looking for work, our women still making 60 cents to the dollar of what men make, college students trying to find a job, trying to get a degree, finding themselves in student debt slavery, our medical professionals after they graduate trying to help poor people with their healthcare needs, trying to get them back in the mix. It's one of the great challenges of our society. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. with S. Todd Yuri on Wealthy Wednesdays. When we come forward, maybe one more question for Dr. Yuri, but we're going to let him take us out of here on a word of hope. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. You're listening to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show with S. Todd Yuri. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. This is Wealthy Wednesdays with Reverend Dr. S. Todd Uri, the politics of our faith. Dr. Uri, welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show.
Man, there's always something new every week. I never know what to expect from you. So this is always exciting.
Dr. Uri, slavery by a different form. In a real sense, from our last break and the last segment of our show, I really feel with hindsight now that they're bankrupting the ability for a third Reconstruction in this nation. They're bankrupting it. They're making it impossible for the American people to pay for an inclusive dream. The dream that we've held on to has to be paid for. Work with us here, Dr. Uri.
Well, who is the dreamer, right? And who is the financer? Those are two questions. There is this thing that says, if you don't already have resource, then hoping for some benevolent act from somebody is the only real way you're going to be able to get to where you want to be, because the structure doesn't support it. But when we talk about slavery, I want to make sure that we get this. Remember that even today, there are correctional corporations that are entities of state governments, even the state of Maryland, that make products and services that the state government and nonprofits purchase and buy with the labor of persons currently incarcerated. So when we think about slavery, and you mentioned it earlier, slavery hasn't gone away. It's just been reframed and reformed. It's taken on a new form. And so even what we see now is this tug of war, immigration. Where do you get cheap labor to be able to get food to the table? And how do you protect this fear? We didn't get to the whole conversation about, these attitudes about constitutional entitlement, that you're going to get rid of folks, and the Supreme Court say, I can send you wherever I choose to send you, even if you have no ties to that place. Well, that sounds like the human trafficking, this time not using boats, but using airplanes. That I don't have a process or a plan or an opportunity to affirm my dignity and protect my liberty. As a matter of fact, I shouldn't have to protect my liberty, because liberty is a constitutional entitlement. And so when we work through these issues, we're now struggling with this notion of trying to prove that somehow or other our appeal is valid, and seeking the affirmation of a government that is now clearly in our face, no apologies, not going to change it, is playing let's make a deal in our face, but not for our benefit. That's a whole problem. And so when we talk about the slave system, we can't talk about it like it's some nostalgic historical yesteryear. There's a slave system going on right now. There's a slave system being reified right now, reinforced right now. And we've got to deal with the realities of today, and not just keep dealing with it like it's yesterday. Remember, you were talking about enslavement. Remember, Governor DeSantis said slavery was a job training program. We should be grateful that we were brought over here to learn how to pick their cotton and work in their fields.
I am more convinced than ever, and I think Dr. King was as well, and many of our leaders in the civil rights movement, that their critique of capitalism itself is the acknowledgement that it's not just white over black in terms of color and the caste system, but that the system itself manufactures a need for a cheap labor in order for the profit motive to rush itself to the top. And the only chance that the people in the barrio, the ghettos, the trailer parks, the people who catch the early bus, our people who work in hotels and are cleaning the streets, and the sanitation workers and the plumbers and the and the carpenters, the only way they benefit is if the government itself is strong enough not to redistribute wealth, but through taxes, pay for programs that allows for minimum high quality standards of care for all of the people in order to protect domestic tranquility. Tell me if I'm wrong, Dr. Ure.
Well, you're right on it, but then there's also the other issue that not only is there a deficit in terms of how the government operates, there's a deficit in terms of fulfilling the moral obligation to address the harms that they imposed on some communities intentionally.
Mm.
The government has never paid the price for using United States government military aircraft to drop bombs on the Greenwood section of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Now let's think about it. Now we're seeing the military being activated in cities across the country because there has to be a restoration of, quote, law and order. And there's no check, there's no balance to make sure that that government does not go awry. And so when we talk about these opportunities, every time the government does what this government and others like it have done throughout history, that tab gets bigger. And there's no conversation about how do we close the gap. If you close the gap, if you take care of all of the free labor that you've gotten way back, adjusted for inflation, and then position that to be an opportunity that allows us to be more self-determinative of our future, then maybe we can have a conversation. But as long as there's this denial, y'all keep talking about slavery, like we got to keep going back there, like somehow or other it's our fault that y'all got rich off of our labor. You owe us still. And that's the real issue. The government will not pay because the government's heart ain't in it.
This has been one of the wealthiest of all Wednesdays. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. You're listening to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. Our very special guest and contributor has been S. Todd Ure, and we want to thank Atiba Madian for his invaluable contribution to the ongoing struggle to build a more perfect union for all Americans. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Until tomorrow, the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show.